past 2 days we have discussed the code, various aspects related to the code, those that are signatories to the code, and which WADA will then monitor more than 660 organizations. But of course, this code, when it was adopted in Copenhagen in 2003, it was not only the world of sport that was there, but we had many governments from around the world also sitting around the table. And when the code was adopted, there was, of course, realization that the code and the format in which it is written is not something that governments can adopt or can sign on to. Governments deal with treaties and conventions and those types of legal intergovernmental documents. And therefore, at the time of accepting the code, governments committed to implement the code by first of all, signing a non-binding instrument, which was called the Copenhagen Declaration, which committed countries to start implementing, or governments to start implementing the code, whilst also committing to work towards the development and institutionalization of that kind of governmental document which would ensure that governments can sign on to that, and through that then implement the code. So the International Convention Against Doping in Sport was then developed by UNESCO, and it came into force on the 1st of February 2007, just in time for the Torino Winter Olympic Games, and that happened after the 30th country ratified the convention. Now, for those working in governments and have an idea how governments operate, of course, the wheels churn very slowly. But in this instance, they started developing this convention in 2005, and in 2007 this was ready to be implemented. So for UNESCO, this was in record-breaking time that they managed to develop this global document that all countries agreed to implement through their various systems. Also, it was the quickest convention that actually came into force, because if you look at conventions, there's conventions that have been developed and ready for ratification since maybe, let's say, 2001, but has not come into force because they are still waiting for the appropriate number of countries to ratify for that convention to actually come into force. So that just shows the importance of this convention. I think the seriousness with which countries grappled with the issue and agreed to develop this document. There are some things that the world of sport just cannot do. They don't have the resources, or they don't have the authority, or they don't have the mechanisms and tools through which to implement or to contribute to the fight against doping in sport. It was not possible for the UCI when the Festina affair broke out during the Tour de France. It was not possible for them to do search and to search the hotel rooms or the cars of the team members. It was only the government that could do that, and that was just one of the reasons why it was important for governments to come on board. Governments have very clear things that they can do. As I already said, they have mechanisms and resources that sport doesn't have. First of all, there was realization, and the code, both the code and the convention, actually refers to the various aspects that governments can do to assist sport in the fight against doping. Things that governments can do that sport have no authority over, and therefore we at WADA say that we are 50-50 split, because without the one partner, sport or governments, our battle will be futile. The bigger country of which they are part then it also ratifies. That means, and it translated, the statisticians inform us that means that approximately 97% of the world's population are now covered under this convention. As I mentioned, this is by far the most successful convention under the auspices of UNESCO, both in terms of the speed at which it was completed and the number of countries that have ratified it. In Africa, we have 11 countries. Until a few months ago, we had 10 to go, but then South Sudan was created, and therefore we now have 11 ratify the convention, and we are working hard with those countries. None of the African partners that have come down must still ratify, so I don't want to preach to the converted, but we need to ensure that we get 100% of the region to do that. It's the right thing, it's the proper thing, and we, as a continent, we need to pull our weight and ensure that we speak to our neighbor countries, that we speak to our colleagues in those countries that's yet to ratify, so that we can get all 54 countries on board. I would also just like to mention that of course these 170 or 179, whichever way you look at it, they of course form part of the conference of parties. And South Africa is currently chairing the conference of parties. And the next meeting will be held next year, probably prior to the World Conference. We don't have a date yet, but I think that also bodes very well for South Africa and Africa. The last thing I wanted to mention was the fact that a lot of countries in Africa especially, they have the best intentions in the world to ensure that they commit fully to anti-doping and to have programs that's in line with the code and that's in line with the convention. But we do know the realities of the resources are very scarce. We have priorities that governments need to address. And what the Conference of Parties decided to do was to ensure that there is also a fund attached to the convention that countries can apply for funding based on certain criteria to assist countries in developing their programs.